In the world of audit, analytical procedures play a major role. These are their stories.
I'm Jackson Yegi.
And I'm Brendan Wagner.
So there are three types of analytical procedures. There's trend analysis, ratio analysis, and reasonableness analysis. The first one we're going to look at is the trend analysis. What that pretty much is looking at individual accounts when you're given a financial statement and comparing those numbers with the actual numbers that you get on the financial statements. You'll also want to look at related accounts related to those individual accounts to see if they're all trending in the same direction. And if not, you'll want to be like, okay, there might be some fraud going on here. So that's your trend analysis. Ratio analysis is looking at relationships between accounts. So examples include return on equity, current ratio, and the gross profit ratio. This type of analysis is a lot more effective than the trend ratio analysis because you can better identify risks because you're comparing relationships between accounts, and it's just more effective than looking at individual accounts. And the last analysis that we're going to do is the reasonableness analysis. So what I've thought of this is the easiest one I think. So when I think of reasonableness analysis, I'm thinking, if a baseball team reports that they have $1 billion in ticket sales, and you go to like 6 or 7 of their games and you see that the stadiums are only half sold out, are they really actually having $1 billion of ticket sales, or are they just juicing their numbers to look good? So that's just reasonable analysis, just kind of looking at the statements, making sure everything just makes sense and nothing's like overpriced or anything like that. So there are 3 phases where you can perform these analytical procedures: planning, substantive, and the wrap-up. And your trend and ratio analysis are going to be in all 3 because they're really important to all 3 steps. But your reasonableness is only going to be in your substantive phase, primarily because when you look at your reasonableness, you already have all the data. So when you're planning or wrapping up, you're not really looking at the numbers, you're more looking at risks. And when you're wrapping up, you're looking at, has everybody signed all the documents and whatnot. But trend and ratio, definitely important to planning, definitely important to wrapping up. Now I'm going to show you some pictures of trend analysis and ratio analysis. So this particular picture is for our ratio analysis. It only shows 2 years. Usually ratio analysis shows a little bit more than 2 years, probably 3 or 4. So you can get a good grip on how these ratios have increased or decreased over time. But the only ones that really stand out here are debt to total assets ratios. But again, if we were given a couple more years with this data, maybe it would level out some more. Just these 2 years, the really 1.4 decrease from 2015 to 2016 really stands out. But so yeah, that's just ratio analysis. And then our trend analysis, looking at this balance sheet for Coca-Cola. Once again, it's only 2 years. Once again, trend analysis usually spans over multiple years, because over a year you can lose a lot, you can gain a lot. So there's not a lot of good information only coming from a 1 year jump from 2009 to 2010. But here, far right column, percent change, huge column for us to look at. You see the marketable securities account there. It's jumped over 122%, which is a big jump. But once again, we're only given 2 years of data. We don't know if that's a big jump or not. Plus, it's under $200 the marketable securities accounts are. So not a big concern there. Other liabilities, definitely a big concern, huge concern actually. 391% increase, going from 300 to 1500. So definitely have to look into that a little bit more, as well as our long-term debt. We just need more data. That's usually what we get with trend analysis. But just this picture that I pulled only had 2, and I thought Coca-Cola would be a good example for us to look at. So yeah, that's our trend analysis and our ratio analysis examples.
Now we're going to look at what the AICPA has to say about analytical procedures. If you look up and research AU-C 520 from the AICPA website, they identify 3 different bases of comparison used by auditors when making comparisons to establish reasonableness during the performance of analytical procedures. The first is to compare the information to prior periods. This helps create a baseline for the auditors so they know exactly what the entity has seen in the past and what they can expect this year off of that information. Second is the anticipated results of the entity. So this includes budgets or forecasts for the future, expectations the auditor has based on what they've seen. Those expectations can include estimations of depreciation. They can use that to assess the reasonableness of the results. And finally, by comparing similar industry information. This includes comparison of the entity's ratio of sales to accounts receivable or gross margin percentages against companies of comparable size within their industry. This kind of helps the auditor find out just where their success is coming from and if it is reasonable within the industry that they exist in. Now, if we look at the PCAOB and what they have said about analytical procedures, they have spoken on the reliance of the data used when performing these analytical procedures. In AS 2305, titled Substantive Analytical Procedures, the PCAOB dug into this. They had 5 things that they discussed on whether or not the data was reliable and how to tell if it's reliable. First was whether the data was obtained from an independent source outside the entity or if it was obtained from inside the entity, because that creates the whole independence issue, and you want to make sure that your data is coming from reliable sources that don't have any interest in the data other than supplying it to you, because you don't want them to cook it. The next is whether sources within the entity were independent of those responsible for the amount being audited. So this also goes along with the independence issue as well, making sure that the best interest is in mind when you're collecting the data. Third is whether the data was developed under a reliable system with adequate controls. The fourth is whether the data was subjected to audit testing in the current or prior year. And lastly, it was whether the expectations were developed using data from a variety of sources. So all these different evaluations help auditors find out, is the data they're using for these analytical procedures reliable? And if it's not, how do they take the steps, or what steps need to be taken to make sure that they get reliable data to run these tests the right way. Now we're going to review back on a case we did prior in the year. In case 2, we analyzed the different analysis run by the auditors for Willis and Adams, who were auditing earthware clothers. So this was a case where we saw a lot of different percentages and a lot of the work already done, and we went in to try to figure out whether that work expressed a going concern. So the auditors at Willis and Adams, they performed these procedures in the planning stages and the preliminary stages of the audit. So they calculated many ratios and as a form of analytical procedures. Some of those ratios that they performed were short-term liquidity ratios, activity ratios, profitability and performance ratios, and then coverage ratios. They also performed trend analysis, of course, across that case as well. So we were able to look at that and use that information just as the auditors would. And that helps the auditors kind of plan out their audit so they can see what the company really needs to be focused on. And it helps them kind of space it out and place the focus on what needs to have the focus.
That's it.
That's good. I like that.